The chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff is pushing back on a Wall Street Journal report which claims the Pentagon wants to keep 1,000 troops in Syria. Now, troop levels in Syria have been a point of contention as war in the country draws down. Now, President Trump has said he wanted to pull troops out, but some critics say that such as Republican Senator Lindsey Graham have been very vocal about a complete military withdrawal. But more recently, the White House has said about 200 troops will remain. So to break all of this down and the disconnect in the reporting and where U.S. policy in Syria is actually headed, we turn to former U.S. diplomat Jim Jatras. Thanks for joining us, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, so as I just said, the Wall Street Journal is now saying the U.S. is going to keep troops at 1,000 at least. However, you've got a general, this is General Joseph Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, saying that's factually incorrect. And I quote, General Joseph Dunford said he's refuting the Wall Street Journal report, saying that the U.S. military, that there's been no change to the plan announced in February, and we continue to implement the president's direction to draw down U.S. forces to a residual presence. Who do we believe, and why are we having this disconnect right now? This is a major piece of communication failure.
Well, it's a disconnect, and it's not just a communications failure. It's a failure to, I think it is a failure to carry out what the president wants to do. Look, we know, back to the Bob Woodward book, that he's repeatedly tried to get us out of Syria, and the swamp, if you will, has pushed back and wants us to keep us in there with a, quote, residual force. Now, is that 1,000? Is it 200? Let's leave aside for a moment the question that having them there in the first place is illegal under both American law and international law. Why are they being left there at all? Obviously, it has nothing to do with ISIS. It's all about Iran, Iran, Iran.
Well, that's the question. You know, last month you said the White House said we're going to keep 200 people there. If let's just say that the White House gets its way, and then just 200, is that too little to actually be able to do anything, to be able to keep peace, or is that too many as it is? Should we have zero within the region?
Well, they're not there to keep peace, and they're not there to fight ISIS either. They're there.
What are they to do?
Look, what Mr. Trump inherited was a years-long effort to overthrow the Syrian government, and bring a bunch of terrorists to power. And we've been supporting terrorist groups all over Syria. ISIS didn't come out of nowhere. Now, the question is, now that the Syrian government has won the war, what are we doing there at all? Well, we can't let the Russians win. We can't let the Iranians win. They're there for political leverage. That's what they're there. And that's why Senator Graham and others, and I'm afraid others in the administration, like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, don't want to get out of Syria because they want them there to keep a spoon and stirring in the pot for future political purposes.
So in this case, and obviously unless you're on the ground or you're actually sitting in the Pentagon, you can't trust some of the words sometimes that come out, whether or not they're telling. Do you think they got caught trying to keep troops there, and the Wall Street Journals actually reported accurately that behind the scenes while President Trump was saying, yes, we're going to withdraw everybody, the truth was they had plans to keep these troops there all along, and they got caught. And that's why you have the general saying, no, we're not telling the truth here.
I think there's an element of that, and I think, and I'm glad to hear the general coming out saying this, because
now he's going to be on the record for it. It better happen.
Remember, Mr. Trump is the commander-in-chief. Generals are supposed to follow orders, aren't they? And if he wants them out, they should get out. Now, I'm sure there's a tug of war going on in the administration, and maybe what we're seeing here is the sort of the public face of a tug of war that's going on behind closed doors.
Let's talk diplomatically. Considering this would allow the U.S. to continue the partnership with Kurdish forces, what does Turkey want? How do they feel about that?
Again, this is the rock and the hard place we've managed to insert ourselves into between our NATO ally, somewhat estranged NATO ally, Turkey, on the one hand, and our Kurdish quasi-ally, who, of course, are bitter enemies. Supposedly, we were there in the mostly Turkish, but not entirely, Kurdish, but not entirely Kurdish zone in order to fight ISIS. ISIS is now losing the last little bit of land they had in that eastern zone in Syria. What are we staying there for? They're talking about staying in Al-Tamf, which is nowhere near the area where ISIS is. This is on the Jordanian border. This is just meddling inside Syria in order to try to affect the outcome of the war, even though the Syrian side has won.
Well, that's the question right now. You know, they do say that if we leave too early, that ISIS, what are the chances that ISIS could reemerge again and rebirth and be stronger? Sort of like what we've seen other terrorist groups happen in Iraq when they said we irresponsibly withdrew from there. Yeah,
well, even that irresponsibly withdrawing from Iraq was itself a lie. That is a fake story in order to justify our further meddling in the region. No, ISIS is not going to reconstitute itself because we pull out. Quite to the contrary. If we actually did get out and the Kurds were forced to come to terms with the Syrian government, then the Syrian army and the Russian Air Force will kill every one of them. They're not going to reconstitute themselves. Our being there provides the best opportunity for them to reconstitute.
Well, that's the last thing we want, is to cause any motivation for any terrorist group to grow in any way. Thank you for joining us, Jim.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.